The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not be in want. When I was born, the common view was that nurture decided everything. In the decades that followed, the emphasis shifted to nature. And in the last 20 years, people have talked more broadly about the way nature and nurture propel each other. But having children has made me wonder if a third element is involved, some unknowable inflection of spirit or divinity. Tomorrow's forum guest, Andrew Solomon, wrote these words as part of his book, Far from the Tree. It's a book about exceptional children in ordinary families. It's one of the most important books I've read in the last 10 years. And it covers subjects such as the titles of the chapters are deaf, dwarf, Down syndrome, autism. It's a tremendously important book. He writes about how the parents of severely disabled children almost need to believe in something bigger than themselves, something like God. He also feels convinced that love does not come in finite quantities, but that every kind of love ultimately builds up every other kind of love. In his chapter on schizophrenia, he writes about the great social experiment which we call deinstitutionalization. These were policies that reduced the number of people with schizophrenia in long-term custodial care in the United States from 500,000 in the year 1950 to some 40,000 today, even though the population of the country has doubled. So now, 150,000 people with schizophrenia are homeless. 1 in 5 people with schizophrenia is homeless in any given year. Solomon explains the experience of isolation and loneliness that comes with schizophrenia. Usually the disease emerges in late adolescence after parents and children have bonded. He writes that, like Alzheimer's, quote, it is an illness not of accrual, but of replacement and deletion. Rather than obscuring the previously known person, this disease to some extent eliminates that person. He explains that the tragedy of this disease can take away the ability to connect to love or trust another person. Takes away careers, the ability to take care of ourselves, our own self-awareness, our ability to think clearly. Solomon says, quote, most famously, the schizophrenic disappears into an alternative world of voices that he erroneously perceives to be external. Sometimes the person even experiences visual and even olfactory hallucinations that make, quote, a world full of actual threats into a writhing hell of inescapable terrorization. Now, oddly enough, I don't infrequently run across people, or I frequently hear from people who tell me that religion is a form of mental illness. And I don't think that I've ever experienced hallucinations myself, but I do have a tangible sense that Jesus, the Good Shepherd, is with me, and that Jesus is guiding my life. On this Good Shepherd Sunday, I want to talk about what that feels like. So I want to begin by remembering how Jesus describes himself in the Gospel of John, and then study the practical spirituality of Psalm 23. In the world of the Gospel of John, Jesus uses 7 I am statements, and the narrator also describes 7 signs that Jesus is the Messiah. The sign that's associated with Jesus saying, I am the Good Shepherd, is Jesus' act of healing a man who is born blind. He does this on the Sabbath, the day that's set aside for rest according to the 10 Commandments. And the religious authorities, they're feeling threatened by his increasing power, and they wonder about him healing on the Sabbath. And they go to the blind man's family, and they basically intimidate them. And then they go to the blind man himself, and they do the same, and the blind man refuses to relent, and they basically kick him out of the community. The man goes to Jesus, who then comforts him. So when Jesus says, I am the good shepherd, he echoes the warning of other prophets like Isaiah and Ezekiel and Zechariah. He implies that we ourselves can be like the good shepherd who love and care for people for their own sake. Or we can be bad shepherds who use other people for the sake of our own ego or advancement. In the verse immediately before our reading today, Jesus says, I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. For me, that is the ultimate test of our intuitions and our inner life. Are our thoughts leading us into peace, into unity and intimacy with God, and a deeper contribution of kindness to the communities that we find ourselves in? This is exactly what we were created for, and it is what we at our best experience: abundant life. Jesus makes one last, absolutely crucial and very frequently ignored point. He says, I have other sheep that do not belong to this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. We have such a terrible tendency to divide ourselves into groups and to define our identity as being in opposition to someone who is different from us. And here, Jesus refers to one of the greatest mysteries at the very heart of God. That is, we do not know how other people are connected to God, how God is touching their life. This saying reminds me of the validity of other religions, of other pathways to the holy. It helps me to stay humble and to really realize that I can learn about holiness from anyone. So in summary, John's gospel teaches us three things about encountering the Good Shepherd. First, this involves a call to serving, not using others. Second, it is an invitation to abundant life, which is intimacy with God and our neighbor. And finally, it respects the fact that God has sheep of other folds. So this is what we know theoretically about Jesus. But Christianity has never been chiefly about dogma, doctrine, or ideas. It is not primarily correct thinking or belief, but rather it is a relationship with Jesus. I listen to my life. I look to God for help. And as I do this, I can't help but have a picture of who God is in my mind. And this picture is deeply shaped by the 23rd Psalm. Philip Keller wrote a very simple little book about being a shepherd himself and how that helped him to understand Psalm 23 in a new way. Most of us, most of the time, operate under a set of assumptions about ourselves. We regard ourselves as reasonable, competent, likable, understanding, basically as decent kinds of people, as pretty okay. But when we say to ourselves, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not be in want, we are reminded that we are like sheep, that we are in a dependent relationship with God and with our experience in the world. Keller points out that sheep can be silly animals. They are frequently getting lost. They overgraze. They eat the wrong poisonous herbs. More pointedly, he says that they are helpless, timid, feeble creatures. They have one strategy to get away from danger, and that is to just run like mad. Sheep can become cast or cast down. That's what happens when a sheep loses its balance and is stuck on its back with just its four legs up in the air. It's a very dangerous position to be in, and in certain forms of weather, it can lead to their death in only a matter of hours. So when the shepherd has lost one of his sheep, that's the first thing that the shepherd is thinking, that the sheep might be cast and vulnerable and in danger. In short, sheep by their nature need help, and we do too. But who is this Lord? Who is this manager or owner of the sheep? The psalm answers this question. The Lord makes me lie down in green pastures. The Lord restores my soul. The Lord leads me along right pathways. Now, it may not have occurred to you before, but beautiful pastures are actually the work of the shepherd. They don't come into being on their own. The shepherd cultivates them. Keller's neighbor was a terrible shepherd. He was a bad manager of the land, and his sheep were spindly, malnourished, and they would huddle at the edge of the fence near Keller's pasture and look longingly at the green pastures on his side of the fence. Sheep need 4 things in order to be able to lie down. They need to be free from fear, free from conflict with one another, free from pests, and free from hunger. And the good shepherd provides these things. The psalm goes on to say, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. The rod is the club that the shepherd used to beat off the wolves. And the staff is a long stick that is used to rescue sheep who've fallen into a thicket or on the edge of a cliff. It's a way of sorting through sheep, of drawing a sheep closer so you can inspect its health. And Keller even said that some shepherds are so attached to particular sheep that they'll walk along with the edge of the staff touching the sheep. It's almost as if the 2 creatures are holding hands. The constant question of our life is, are we going to be the Lord's sheep or not? And those who choose the Good Shepherd, and it's a choice that we choose over and over through a lifetime, those people find themselves changed. They shall not be in want. Their cup is running over. They are content. And because of that, God does in them goodness and mercy. And goodness and mercy follows them all the days of their life. This is the kind of person who seeks God in prayer. It's the kind of person who finds the Holy Spirit near at hand. This person conveys joy, serenity, and gratitude. Now, we all know people who are like this, and they're so rare that we're so grateful for their presence in our life. And today, we are celebrating the life of an extraordinary person, one of the greatest Christians I know. Today is Jeffrey Hokum's last day at Grace Cathedral before he retires. He's been on the staff for 14 years, 15 years. He's been part of the cathedral life for far longer. He'd be embarrassed if I went on at too great a length, but he is someone who I see as utterly devoted to the Good Shepherd, and it really shows in his life. He has extraordinary gifts for organizing tasks and volunteers. He's deeply creative at planning worship for us that draws us closer to God. And most importantly, he's better at dealing with difficult people than almost anyone I know. And he was someone who will always tell you the truth when you ask for it. Now, in retirement, I expect he and James will continue to be great friends of this cathedral because we have so much affection for them. They're a huge blessing for us, and I'm so grateful that our relationship will continue on. Now, before I conclude the sermon, I want to tell you one last thing, and that is I want to tell you about a friend of mine that I knew for 14 years. It was the neighbor directly across the street from my house. Keith was gaunt from walking hundreds of miles every month, and he was very dark-skinned from constantly being out in the bright light of the sun. And he was deeply distressed by the people in our neighborhood because his behavior seemed odd. He was always writing things down in his little book, and he hung around in the playgrounds a little longer than people felt comfortable with. And so they stayed away, and they gossiped, and they even called the police. Now, as you imagine, Keith suffers from schizophrenia, and I'm so grateful that we became close friends. We both pay attention to ordinary things. We're both noticing what happens around us. We both are observing things that maybe other people don't notice. And I still appreciate his gentle manner his questions, and the way that he cared about me. And I'm so grateful that the Good Shepherd has opened my life to encounters like this one. Am I crazy to talk to God? To listen to the inner promptings that I believe are from the Good Shepherd? I don't know. But I do know that when I have walked through the valley of the shadow of death, God has not abandoned me. God has revived my soul. Maybe the question is not, are we crazy? But rather, what can we do for the people who are suffering around us? Love does not come in finite quantities for us to save or conserve. Every act of love strengthens all other kinds of love. Let us walk in joy with the Good Shepherd. Let us have abundant life. Amen.